The winter wind howled through the small Colorado town, rattling the windows of the modest clinic where nurse Emily Harper had spent the day tending to patients. It was Christmas Eve, and the streets were nearly deserted, dusted in fresh snow that reflected the pale light of the street lamps. Emily's shift had been long, but her heart had felt full, until the last call came. A man with a deep cough and frostbitten fingers had staggered in, pleading for help. By the time she'd bandaged his hands and given him warm tea, night had fallen, leaving her to walk home alone through the biting cold. Emily pulled her coat tighter around her, the soft fur lining barely shielding her from the icy air. She adjusted the strap of her bag and started down the narrow street that led out of town, her boots crunching against the snow. The familiar houses and shops blurred under the haze of snowfall, and she felt a quiet unease she couldn't shake. Something about the stillness felt off, as if the entire town were holding its breath. Then, from the shadows at the edge of the woods that bordered the road, she saw movement. A black carriage, silent except for the soft scrape of runners on snow, emerged, cutting an unnatural figure through the white landscape. Emily's pulse quickened. The carriage stopped abruptly, and before she could take a step back, masked men leapt out. "Hey, stop!" she shouted, but the wind stole her voice. They grabbed her arms with startling strength, dragging her toward the hills that rose like jagged teeth against the night sky. Emily struggled, kicking and twisting, but the bandits' grip was ironclad. Her breath came in harsh clouds, freezing instantly in the cold air, stinging her lungs. Panic clawed at her chest. "Somebody help me, please." The bandits ignored her cries, muttering to one another as they pushed her into the dense snow. Each step upward was a battle, her boots sank into drifts as she fought to keep her footing. Emily's mind raced, cataloging escape possibilities in a frenzy, but the men were relentless, their eyes hidden behind dark masks, giving nothing away. The hills loomed taller with each step, their peaks disappearing into the swirling snow. Despite the fear, Emily refused to succumb. She remembered her training, the calmness under pressure, the clarity in a crisis. She focused on her breathing, slowed her movements, and searched for any weakness in the bandits' formation. The snow fell heavier now, icing her hair and eyelashes, but even in the cold, her resolve hardened. Somewhere in the distance, a faint light glimmered, a hint of hope, or perhaps a cruel trick played by the storm. As the carriage disappeared behind the trees, Emily realized she was utterly alone in the wilderness, dragged into the heart of the snowy hills with no clear way back. Yet, even shivering and exhausted, she clung to one thought: she would survive. Somehow, she would escape. The wind whispered through the pines, carrying a chilling warning, but Emily's eyes burned with determination. Fear might have guided her captors, but courage would guide her steps. And as she was pulled further into the darkness, one truth became certain: she would not give up without a fight. Emily's hands were raw and numb from the rough rope that bound them. Each step through the deep snow was exhausting, her boots sinking into the icy drifts as the bandits forced her further into the hills. The wind cut sharply across her face, and snow clung to her hair and eyelashes, blurring her vision. Every fiber of her being screamed to fight, but exhaustion weighed heavily on her muscles. Still, she refused to surrender. Survival demanded cunning, not panic. She scanned the area, noticing the uneven terrain and a narrow ravine that might offer a chance. The bandits were focused on arguing among themselves, voices muffled by the wind, and she realized this might be her only opportunity. Timing was critical. With a deep breath, she tested the ropes again, twisting her wrists against the coarse fibers. A small slack gave her a tiny freedom of movement. Emily's heart pounded as adrenaline surged through her veins. In one swift motion, she twisted her body and pulled free, tumbling into the snow. Pain shot through her shoulder, but she didn't stop. She scrambled up, moving as fast as her frozen limbs would allow. The bandits shouted, but their voices were muffled by the howling wind. Snowflakes fell so thickly that they blurred her pursuers, giving her precious seconds to put distance between herself and danger. The hills rose steeply ahead, covered in thick pine forests. Emily ducked behind a fallen log, chest heaving, and listened. Her ears caught the distant sound of boots crunching through snow. The bandits were regrouping, but the storm masked their exact location. She couldn't rest. Each moment of delay increased her risk, but moving recklessly could exhaust her completely. She forced herself to calm down, focusing on breathing and the faint light she had glimpsed earlier. With careful, uneven steps, she made her way toward it. The source was a cabin, its windows glowing warmly against the night. Every fiber of her body ached, but hope propelled her forward. Her fingers were stiff and bleeding from the icy grip of the snow, and her legs trembled, but the thought of shelter, warmth, and safety kept her moving. The bandits' shouts faded slightly behind her, giving her a fragile sense of relief. Finally, she stumbled out of the forest and onto a small clearing. The cabin was closer now, and she could see smoke rising from its chimney. She pounded on the wooden door, her voice cracking, "Please. Help. I'm trapped." Inside, a silhouette appeared, tall and imposing, yet calm. A strong hand opened the door, and Emily fell into it, shivering violently, tears freezing on her cheeks. The warmth of the cabin hit her like a wave. Someone was watching over her. She didn't know who he was yet, but instinct told her he was not the enemy. The bandits were somewhere behind, hidden in the darkness of the storm. But here, in the glow of the cabin, Emily finally allowed herself a brief moment of hope. She had escaped the immediate danger, but the night was far from over. As the door closed against the storm, Emily realized that trust, courage, and quick thinking were her only allies in the snowy hills. Somewhere beyond the trees, danger still lurked, but she had survived. And for the first time that night, she believed she might make it to safety. Nathaniel Kane had been riding through the snow-laden hills since dawn, his eyes scanning every ridge and hollow for any sign of the missing nurse. A wealthy rancher with a reputation for decisiveness and courage, he knew the dangers of the Colorado winter better than most. The storm had grown heavier, and each gust of wind carried snow that stung his face and blurred his vision. But Nathaniel pressed on. Somewhere in this frozen wilderness, Emily Harper was struggling to survive, and he would not rest until she was safe. Hours of searching had left him exhausted, yet Nathaniel's determination never wavered. He spurred his horse forward, trusting instinct and experience to guide him through the treacherous terrain. Deep drifts of snow threatened to halt their progress, and the wind howled through the pines like a warning, but Nathaniel's focus was unwavering. Then, from the edge of a small clearing, he saw her, a faint, staggering figure barely keeping her balance in the snowstorm. "Emily," he called, his voice firm but calm, cutting through the roar of the wind. The woman turned slowly, eyes wide with fear and exhaustion. Recognition flashed across her face, and she took a hesitant step toward him before collapsing to her knees. Nathaniel leapt from his saddle, catching her just in time before she hit the snow. She trembled violently, the cold having drained her strength almost completely. He wrapped his thick coat around her shoulders, his hands steady and warm against her freezing body. "You're safe now," Nathaniel said, scanning the surrounding hills. His gaze was sharp, alert for any sign of the bandits who had dragged her into this peril. "I've got you. You're not alone anymore." Emily's teeth chattered uncontrollably, and tears froze on her cheeks, but relief softened the panic in her eyes. She clung to him instinctively, knowing that she had been saved from the brink of disaster. Gently, Nathaniel lifted her onto his horse, careful not to jar her injured and frozen limbs. The horse shifted beneath their weight, snorting softly in the snow, and Nathaniel guided it down the slope toward the safety of his ranch. Every crunch of the horse's hooves through the deep drifts seemed amplified in the silent storm, but Nathaniel's presence offered reassurance. Emily's shivering slowed as warmth began to seep from his coat, and her breathing gradually steadied. By the time they reached the outskirts of the ranch, twilight had painted the sky in shades of pale orange and silver. The main house stood illuminated against the snow, a beacon of warmth in the otherwise frozen wilderness. Nathaniel gently helped Emily down, keeping her wrapped tightly as he led her inside. The roaring fireplace greeted them, sending waves of heat that chased away the lingering chill. For the first time in hours, Emily felt safe. Sitting by the fire, sipping hot tea Nathaniel had prepared, she finally allowed herself to breathe. Outside, the storm continued, but inside the cozy cabin, there was light, warmth, and protection. Nathaniel's calm presence was a shield against the terror of the night, and Emily realized that her ordeal was over, for now. The snowy hills had tested her courage, but in the hands of this determined rancher, she had found refuge, and perhaps, hope. The warmth of Nathaniel Kane's ranch cabin wrapped around Emily Harper like a protective blanket. After hours in the freezing snow, being dragged and running for her life, she could finally feel her body thawing. The fireplace roared, sending flickering shadows across the wooden walls, and the rich scent of burning pine mingled with the aroma of freshly baked bread. For the first time that night, Emily allowed herself to feel safe. Nathaniel sat opposite her, sturdy and calm, a mug of steaming cocoa in his hand. He watched her carefully, giving her space while ensuring she was comfortable. "Drink this," he said, placing the warm mug in her hands. Emily's fingers clutched it tightly, letting the heat seep through her frozen skin. The warmth spread slowly, chasing away the numbness in her fingers and toes. Her teeth no longer chattered, but her body still trembled with residual fear. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse from hours of shouting and crying in the wind. Nathaniel only nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. There was no need for words, his presence alone reassured her. The storm outside continued, snow piling against the windows, but inside, the ranch was a haven of comfort and safety. Emily dried her wet hair with a thick towel Nathaniel handed her and changed into warm, dry clothing he had prepared. She shivered as the warmth returned to her body, but the terror that had gripped her on the hills began to fade. She felt a mixture of exhaustion, relief, and gratitude that left her voice trembling. Nathaniel remained nearby, checking the perimeter and occasionally glancing at her with a careful, protective gaze. As she sipped her cocoa, Emily looked around the cabin and noticed the simple decorations Nathaniel had placed for Christmas. A small evergreen tree, adorned with handmade ornaments, stood by the hearth. Candles flickered on the windowsill, their soft light reflecting off the snow outside. In that moment, she realized that even amid fear and uncertainty, there could be warmth, light, and kindness. Nathaniel placed a blanket around her shoulders and led her to a comfortable chair by the fire. "Rest now," he said gently. "You've been through enough for one night." Emily leaned back, letting the fire's heat seep into her bones. Her eyelids grew heavy, the stress and cold finally catching up with her. Outside, the hills were silent, blanketed in white, and the bandits' threat seemed like a distant memory. As the night deepened, Emily felt a profound sense of peace. She had been pulled from danger, guided to safety, and protected by someone whose courage and compassion had matched the ferocity of the storm. That Christmas Eve, she realized that hope could survive even in the harshest conditions, and kindness could appear when least expected. For Emily Harper, the snowy hills had tested her courage, but the warmth of Nathaniel Kane's ranch had restored her faith in humanity. She closed her eyes, finally allowing herself to sleep, knowing that in the coldest, darkest night, safety, warmth, and unexpected companionship could light the way. Christmas Eve had brought her not only survival but the comfort of hope renewed.